Well, we are very fortunate today to have two terrific attorneys from Fennemore Craig who graciously brought themselves here to answer some of these questions and to give you tools so that you can practice your business and serve your clients well. Bruna Pedrini served as Chief Counsel of the Civil Rights and Conflict Resolution Section of the Arizona Attorney General's Office. She's helped builders, developers, colleges, restaurants, large sports and entertainment venues, and hotels comply with federal, state, and local requirements and represents them in ADA and fair housing litigation. Alexis Glascock has worked in private practice as well as in state government. She has served as counsel to the President of the Arizona Senate and assistant to the General Counsel of the Legislative Council. She has experience drafting and modifying legislation. She gathered experience at the federal level with the majority leadership of the Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Congress. In that role, she selected witnesses to testify before the committee and authored a 3-volume series on the economic impact of women in the marketplace. So please help me welcome Bruna and Alexis. Our next hour is going to be on disparate impact. And so with that, that's kind of an interesting notion. And we've had trouble the last, I'd say, probably 5 years. It's really come into its own since Eric Holder and the HUD secretary at the time under President, I can't remember his name now.
Donovan.
Thank you. Mr. Donovan started really going forward on this concept of disparate impact. And there were lawsuits. And it has changed the way we think of what we do. And in some cases, this is where a lot of the fear comes in. Because in a lot of cases, it seems like no matter what you do, you're going to be wrong, and there's no way to win. And so people become paralyzed. And we have had agents and brokers who, when that first started happening, they would get out of the business, or they'd stop doing the type of business they had done because they just got scared. So this hour is about what that is, so we have an understanding of what that concept is, and then tools that we can implement so that we minimize our fear and we're able to actually carry on our businesses and serve our clients. So disparate impact claims. First of all, they don't assert illegality, but they do assert that your behavior or policy has unequal impacts, even if it's a neutral policy. And that's where our confusion and our fear comes from. Since every policy we have will impact some people more than others or differently, how do we as business owners and property owners create an acceptable policy?
Well, that's a big question. So it's like, all right, so first let's back up and talk about what is disparate impact and what is intentional discrimination. Okay, so just so we're clear. All right, so when we talk about, so in civil rights you have intentional discrimination is when you do something that is with a purpose to discriminate. Okay, so to treat someone differently, and we say because of a protected class status. Okay, and so while we're talking about this, I want to also back up and say, does everyone understand like what a protected class is? Okay, yeah? Do we know why we have protected classes?
So we can't discriminate. So they don't discriminate.
Okay, so we can't discriminate. Okay, but okay, so is everyone in this room in a protected class?
Yes, somehow.
Right? So everyone has a race, a color, a religion, or a choice not to have one, a gender, right? All of the above, right? So everyone's in a protected class. And the reason, though, that we talk about protected classes when we talk about civil rights is because of the term that when we say an immutable characteristic, right? So an immutable characteristic is something about yourself that you cannot change. So when you are treated differently because of something that you cannot change about yourself. So if I get up this morning and I do something really dumb, right? I'm walking around and I've got $20 hanging out of my pocket, and someone comes up to me and, pulls that $20 out of my pocket and, takes off or does something like that and treats me badly, so they've stolen something from me because of that, or the like, I can change that down the line, right? Because I can just change my behavior, right? I can put my $20 in my pocket and not be a fool, right? But if someone wants to, when I get up in the morning, decide that they're going to treat me badly because of the color of my skin or because of my gender, there's not a darn thing I can do about that, right? Because I don't get to get up in the morning and say, today I think I'm going to be a different color, right? Today I'm going to be a different gender, right? I'm going to be something different. So that is why we talk about immutable characteristics. And so when we talk about intentional discrimination, we talk about treating someone differently because of their protected class status, because of one of those protected classes, okay? When we talk about disparate impact, we talk about having a policy or procedure that's neutral on its face, okay? So it doesn't say, I don't rent to women, okay? But as applied, okay, so as applied, it tends to have a disparate impact, and a negative impact on a particular group of people. So for example, if I say, I don't rent to anyone who is over 5 foot, who's over 5'4", okay? Okay? What group of people might I not be renting to? But what about a protected class? Men or women? Men, right? Do I intend not to, so I'm not saying I won't rent to men, right? But unless there's a good business reason why I'm not doing that, if I'm not renting to anyone over 5'4", as applied, that policy is really likely to keep out more men than women, right? Just because more men were more likely to be over 5'4" than women, okay? And you can do that on a whole number of different areas. So that's what we talk about disparate impact. And so when we were talking about it in fair housing, again, we're talking about creating policies and thinking about, okay, I didn't write this policy with the intent of discriminating. But as this policy is applied, it can end up harming or being applied to a particular group of people and keeping them out, right, of a market or the like. So that is what, how we think about it. And that is how we try to avoid creating policies. We try to think about, as I apply it, who does this impact? Right? And unless there's a good business reason for how I do it, sometimes we just have to back it up and there's a different way of doing the same thing that doesn't have the negative impact. And what the disparate impact analysis in the court case, I think that we're going to talk about is that, and this is not new, so the court just upheld what had always been the case, was that you don't have to prove intent. Mm-hmm. So with a disparate impact analysis, you don't have to prove I set out not to rent to men. You just have to show that this is what happened and this is the policy that is at the root of it. Okay.
So I'm gonna go sort of tweak a couple of questions that we had
Okay.
because we're following up on that right
Okay.
now. So one point, Eric Holder and Sean Donovan had made a speech in which they were describing disparate impact.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about how they were very conscious of that and they were going to be basically looking out for that in insurance, real estate type of transactions, and lending. So one of the examples they gave in this presentation was a real estate agent who does not do short sales, but does business in an area, a neighborhood, an area, where at that time there were a lot of short sales. And so that agent says, well, I don't do short sales when someone comes to them, but I will refer you to someone who does do a short sale. Now for us, under RESPA, that's been something that we have done for a long time. We don't have expertise in that area. So we refer them to someone that we know does have expertise. Under this presentation, they said, well, we think that has disparate impact, and we would look at that real estate agent and start to talk to them about what that, because the impact is you're more, and the supposition was that, as they stated, it was that more short sales were happening in minority neighborhoods than non-minority neighborhoods, which wasn't true at the time, at least here in Arizona, but that was their scenario. So how do we, as agents and brokers who don't practice a particular type of real estate, because that's huge and broad, we can't possibly practice every aspect of it. How do we do that and not have someone come in and accuse us of that?
Well, I think what part of it's going to be, what's your practice been? What has been historically, what have you done? Because if you have historically done it, now you're not, that argument can be made. But if on the other hand, you've got pretty strong evidence that you haven't done it,
Okay.
that would be, I mean,
Yeah.
pretty convincing.
So, okay, so when you're talking about have done, let's say in the last recession I did short sales.
Right.
And we're going to have another one in 10 or 12 years.
Right. And so
then
then
I
you,
don't want to go through that.
but you
silliness
weren't
again.
doing it recently.
Okay.
You weren't doing
Thank
it
you.
recently.
All right.
It was separated by enough time. It was a different market. You have an arguable reason why you were doing it then, and then the market changed, and so that's not part of your
Okay.
business profile now.
Great. All right.
Or, not or, so you aren't doing that, and it's associating with someone who might. So as with most areas, and like lawyers have this and doctors have this and everybody else, this is not your area of expertise.
Right.
But you can associate with someone who does those. So saying specifically, if it's used as a pretext
Okay.
to not work with particular communities,
Right.
then, right, I mean, a pretext would actually be more intentional, right? And so what they're looking at is, are you creating just a policy that as you end up applying it, you're keeping out all of these, it's having a disparate impact on a particular group.
Okay.
So then we're going to look a little bit further in there. Is there something else that you could do, right? For example, associating with,
Right.
are there some other business reasons why you never have? Like I've been in real estate for 30 years, I have never touched a short sale, right?
Right.
So it's not just in this particular recession or whatever else, and I do this because of the particular requirements and I'm not good at them. And I wouldn't do them if they were in a white neighborhood. I wouldn't do them if they were in whatever.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. The whole thing
Yeah.
turns out it was at a pretext.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So with this, one of the concerns that we get with the whole disparate impact and folding that into the furthering fair housing mix, so when we look at those together, particularly that map with the orange and blue and black dots, we've already sort of touched on the steering laws and how it's not what we would at first blush consider a problem under steering, which has always been a problem. But how do we make sure that when we're speaking to our clients, and particularly with the auspice of that policy being, hey, communities, you need to have a more equal distribution of the different types of people. So how do we start dealing with the fact that at the local level, when they start getting pressured to have more distribution, that directly goes to us. So although the premise may be, don't worry about having your folks want to live next to grandma and grandpa, which is a lot of times what's happening.
Right.
But at our local level, they're feeling pressure to distribute more evenly that population, and we're caught at that local level trying to accommodate what that locale wants. How do we start managing our business so that we can, because in the end, all we want to do is make sure our client gets the house or condo they want in the home, in the neighborhood they want. But we're starting to feel pressure from the different layers of government on that.
So I would ask for a little bit more clarification, because I wonder how much of it is, I don't want to say true, but how much of it is perception and how much of it, who's feeling the pressure. So if I can get a little.
So at our level, we
Yeah.
would be feeling pressured, like we're caught.
Realtors
like,
are feeling
how
the
do
pressure.
we do this?
How do you
Right.
How
do
in
we
your
accom-
individual
Right.
sale? I mean, so sale by sale, you're feeling pressure from what government?
So as things trickle down, so you have the map in general
Right,
that's saying,
right.
okay, we want a broader distribution. So there's a lot of orange dots here. I'm looking at my client going, great, my client's an orange dot client by their own self-identification.
Right.
So, but they want to be there because grandma and
their
grandpa are there.
their family's
That's
there.
where they want to be.
Right.
So as that trickles down from the feds and it starts to get down to the local
Right.
city level, and those people are looking at it and they're going, wow, we're getting pressure from the feds to have a more equal distribution of our population. Now we're stuck. How do we help our client? But we're feeling that pressure from the equal distribution.
So are you showing when you generate your MLS, they say, I want to be in this neighborhood, do you suggest others as well?
I would say it probably depends on the person, right? If they come in and say, my grandma and grandpa live here, I only want to live
Right.
here, that's the client's choice.
Right. So then it's documented in your file that
Okay.
client presented that way, and so you were accommodating their requirements. And maybe you've also said to them, and you've documented in your file, there's these other areas that are equally beautiful and that are maybe not in the same exact zip code, but are nearby.
Okay, they've said, no, I just want to be by grandma and grandpa.
Then-
Okay, so that conversation log that a lot of your brokers ask you to keep, that becomes very critical in
Right.
this situation, that you're notating and detail what you're discussing, how you're discussing it, when you're discussing it, so that it really is documentable that your buyer, your client, is giving you the direction. I only want to be within 1 mile of grandma and grandpa, as opposed to something else, okay? Yeah.
It sounds like the government is steering.
Well, and that's where I'm having a question about, is the government actually doing that? Or is that just the perception of what people are feeling? That's what I'm trying to
when they
get
issue
at.
the maps and they issue the declarations, then that is where we're getting
That's
this.
what generates
is
the
that
pressure.
It's coming down here, we're going, okay, equal distribution of population, and they're giving a map with orange and blue and black dots, and they're saying, and they're making those statements through their policies and through their guidance and through their just general press releases sometimes. So where do we go with that?
Because what I would, okay, and so I would look at the applicability of what they're talking about. So when you are, so the affirmatively furthering fair housing rules, for example.
Right.
Go to CDBG issues, right?
Right.
And so when you're talking about community block grant money going to cities, and they're looking at what are the impediments to fair housing, for example.
Okay.
Right? The pressure has been from the federal government saying there is money that
Right.
goes to the cities, and other local, entities. And as part of that, and this isn't, again, when I say it's not new, and again, so there's money that goes there, and we want to make sure that as you're using that money and you're doing your analysis, that there aren't impediments to fair housing that are out there that aren't creating these pockets of segregation. So if there are zoning rules, for example, and that's one of the things
Okay.
that the cases come up about, that kind of push people into where there's a disparate impact. Again,
Right.
that's why it's a disparate impact and not an intentional.
Right.
So part of what you're talking about are more intentional type of cases, right? Because if a person is saying, I want to live here,
Right.
right? That's an intentional act,
Okay.
right? When they're talking about disparate impact, you're talking about, is there a policy, something like zoning, funding, where are you putting your infrastructure dollars? Where are things like that going? And are those impacting where people are living? Does that make sense? So that is why I want to just correct if there's some misperceptions about where the pressure is coming from.
Yes.
Yeah, and so to take away some of your fear, if that's what it is that I don't think there's anyone saying you individual realtors need to tell people where to live. Okay? I mean, quite the contrary. I think it's don't tell people where to live. Okay? Give people options where to live. Don't try to, don't limit people in terms of where they live. So if I put myself back when I was doing the enforcement side, okay, because I've worn all those different hats, right? So if I put myself on the enforcement side, it would be, if someone brought that case in, you would be looking at it and going, okay, did you show them houses in a variety of different places, right? And if you said no, I only showed them in this specific little neighborhood here, the question would be, well, how come, right? And if you said, well, they wanted to live next to mom and dad or whatever, it'd be okay. If they said, and you guys have had this from all the other fair housing trainings, if they said, well, I only want to live by white people, or I only want to live by purple people, or whatever, right, or thing, you would say, well, no, as a realtor, right, we don't help with that, right? You'll need to do that all by yourself, right? That's right. So, and so again, you don't help with that. We'll show you what kind of house are you looking for, right? Not what kind of not what demographic person will be living in that neighborhood. And that's what those laws are about. It's not, so again, but the affirmatively furthering fair housing ones are more about when it's the government down, it's how are they using the money? And you guys aren't the recipients of the money, right?
Right.
I don't think.
Well, unless, through those grants, sometimes we'll have DPAs, the down payment assistant programs.
Right.
For our buyers and things like that.
Sure.
So it does funnel down to our clients eventually, which is where we get pulled in and impacted.
Right.
In addition, I've talked to a couple of cities, to the person who's in charge of those type of programs where the grant funds are coming down. And they have indicated to me that they are conscious of the federal government and the furthering fair housing maps and that type of thing. They're getting the funds. They look at it as, and I had one guy say, I'm not sure how we're supposed to force individuals to purchase in certain areas that they don't want to live in. And I don't know that we can change our revitalization programs because they're putting all the money into revitalization, and that's just in a certain area of their town. Their town's not that big. The city's not that big, especially out here in the West Valley. Our cities, when it comes to, geographically they're large, but the old concentrated areas that need help. And what they're conscious of in the city is that's where we're putting our funds because that's where the funds need to go. And under this, we're really conscious, under disparate impact, we're really conscious that the feds may come after us at one point. So
And that's
now,
different.
So how does that type of thing happen as well? Because now that potentially could affect where our clients are able to go to find properties, or even our investors if they're willing to take those funds to rehab that property in that city.
And that's different though, because
Okay.
when you're talking about revitalization dollars and the like, and again, those are going to the cities.
Yes.
Okay, so they're not going directly to you.
Right.
So those dollars, and that goes to the Texas case that you're talking about, which is the Texas the case that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court on disparate impact. It was a 2015 case that got everyone, all riled.
Yes.
So
All over the place.
Yeah, all over the place. Okay, and so really though, and again, it didn't. First of all, if you have the Supreme Court affirming disparate impact, you know that it didn't really step out of line from what had been always the law on disparate impact. So that would be the first thing I would tell you, that so nothing is new from what you have had since 1991. Okay, so if you've been practicing, and doing this since 1991, it's not like we all need to like all a dither right this moment, right? Because what the U.S. Supreme Court said was, this was the law before, right? This is the law now, and it's going to continue to be, because it just affirmed what all the Court of Appeals had said prior to that on disparate impact. All right, so setting that aside for a second, what happens in that case and with revitalization is that a lot of revitalization projects and monies had been put into, and in that particular case in particular, had been put into communities where which was largely a minority community. Okay, so revitalization was going to, or in this case it was inclusive communities monies, was going into neighborhoods that were already 90% minority communities. Okay, and that none of the money was going into white communities. Okay, and the point being that none of the affordable housing kind of stock was being built in white communities. So it's that people of color, if that was, with the ideas of diversity, were not being given opportunities to live in white communities or predominantly white neighborhoods or communities, because none of the housing was being built there. Okay? That instead the housing was continuing to be built in the same neighborhoods where it had always been built. So, and that was the crux of the fight, and that's why it was a disparate impact. It was, in looking at this, it wasn't that this group that had set out to provide dollars for this inclusive communities was and the city there had done anything, didn't mean to be doing in their mind anything wrong. They were providing all of these dollars for more affordable kind of housing units and other units like this, but they were placing it in the same places where they had traditionally placed them. Okay, and so that was the policy that was neutral on its face, but as applied was having a negative impact on a particular group of people. So
that
it's
was
a pretty deep dive into
yeah.
law for all.
That was ICP versus Texas Housing Authority.
Right.
And if you want to read that law and read the opinions, you can go to the WeMARGAD.org website, and we have it up there so you can look at that and read it and read a little bit more about what that whole case was. I think it was in Houston, wasn't that
Yeah,
case
yeah.
in Houston? Yeah. So that might be something for you to look at just so you can understand a little bit more about that. So following along sort of those lines, to the other part of it. So we have a community that needs to be rehabbed. People are going in there, particularly investors, are going in there and they're rehabbing and modernizing and improving the area. And all of a sudden now goes from being a rehab revitalization area and it starts getting that term gentrification. And now prices go up and people who had been living there are moving out because it's too expensive. And under disparate impact, we start having some of those issues come under. So explain to us, particularly if we are working with investors, like how does an investor decide, yeah, I want to go rehab that building and I want to make money. The idea is to rehab it, bring it up to snuff, get rental in there and get income. I mean, that's the whole, no one does it because they, go in the hole. So it's a living to these people. Investors who do this is their living. How do we as real estate agents helping them? How do they know when it's okay to rehab that building and not the other one in another part of town without getting caught up in this?
Well, I'm going to let Bruna take the lion's share of this, but what I do want to mention is that this is a really huge issue. And last year, the legislature passed GIPLET reform, which basically what it did is it went in and said before there were properties, you could be across the street and one was in a blight area, and so they got complete tax abatement, and then the right across the street was another building, and they were paying the taxes, and so there was it was a long time coming, but now it is going to gradually reduce and eliminate that break, and that's in downtown Phoenix, and that was a huge change, and there may be some follow-up legislation on it this year, but that is directly aimed at that sort of situation.
Exactly.
So are investors, when they're taking their capital and trying to rehab, how do they know on the back end they'll be okay?
Well, now the game has changed, right? So now they need somebody to look at it and see if they go in now, and also the people are grandfathered in, so if they're going in now, they're probably too late. But nonetheless, they want to have an attorney look at it and see a tax attorney and tell them, is this a smart investment or not, if you're trying to take advantage of some kind of tax breaks related to that. But it is an issue for investors because those things happen. But it looks like the will of the legislature is now to take away those kind of breaks. So we'll see. ATRA, which I'm sure you're familiar with, the Tax Research Association, has been really vocal, and they championed that issue last year.
So even without taxes, let's just say they go in and they want to, there's a fourplex.
Right.
And they want to rehab it and turn it into something else. Or they want to take it down and turn it into different types of dwelling units.
Right.
But they're really concerned that as that particular area starts to grow and other investors come in and things get better, how can they go in with some kind of surety that what they do as an investor going in and risking their own money,
Right.
investing their time and energy and talents into this property, bringing it up, being rewarded with tenants who pay a
Right.
little more than,
Right, because it's a premium property.
that they're not going to at some point be accused under disparate impact and have to decide that. Because as these areas start to gentrify or become better, then
Right.
you get
People
that
have to-
move out.
right.
And now you start getting the people who worked to make these properties better they start coming under this scrutiny. That makes them nervous.
But then that goes to the
upset.
question of, are they making their property available to everybody? If they're excluding some portion of the population from
Right.
renting that property, or if they're only advertising in certain publications or certain areas where other people wouldn't get access to that information, then conceivably there's an argument that they're doing that. But if they're just MLS listing and anybody could go rent it,
Right.
or their apartments.com or whatever it is, then it's available to everybody. And even as that property is changing, I don't see a disparate impact there, because as you've got regentrification, you're going to have more people moving in, but you're not forcing.
It goes to the cost
Right.
going up, and then
Right.
are forcing
Right.
people. So we just have to be okay with that cycle and understand that there might be an issue or not. And that's just part of the business risk.
Well, yeah, again, I mean, when you're talking about disparate impact, you're talking about, at what point does it's a policy, right? So it's a policy that as applied. So it's not an individual person's or an individual investor's
right.
purchase of property that will
Okay.
have the disparate impact. It will be the city's decision to allow that zoning, let's say, to be XYZ zoning in a particular area,
Okay.
to be, so
Yeah.
a disparate impact analysis, as it's looked at here, and under this line of cases, is policy, right? So it's now for you as individual realtors, or as the investors, if you as an investor have a policy that you only invest in certain neighborhoods, you could have, then you could be subject to a disparate impact
Which for our
analysis,
clients
right?
who are rehabbers, that's exactly what happens. They specialize in an area or neighborhood because they really
Right.
know it. They know what that clientele is.
Sure.
They know what that product is. And so for them, what you're saying is they should really start looking at other areas, not,
Well, but if they're
but they look at it as an expertise type of thing.
But if their policy, okay, but
Right.
let's say, if their policy is, I rehab dilapidated buildings,
Okay,
right?
Right.
Is that, I mean,
rundown, whatever.
What-
It's
I mean, a rundown-
rundown building stock, maybe even convert to additional other uses, whatever it is. But they take something that no one else wants,
Mm-hmm.
and they come in and they make something of it, something better than it was.
Right.
But they may specialize in an area or neighborhood because they understand that area, that product, what they know they're gonna get a certain number of brick, they're really good at brick buildings,
Mm-hmm.
and so they go to the area where the brick buildings are. It's a pretty small area, so.
Right.
Could that be interpreted as a
I mean-
policy?
You're talking about raising prices.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
eventually
Right,
raising
Right,
yeah.
I mean, so basically,
Yeah.
you can, when you're talking about gentrification, I mean, you're basically
Yeah.
pricing certain people out, so.
As you
like,
do that,
right.
yeah.
Again, I wouldn't see a case against I don't see a successful case, let's say, against
Okay.
the individual investor. For
Okay.
that, it would have to be a wide, it'd have to be a really big investor to be able to go in and really
To buy
do
up
that,
all those
to
properties.
buy up a lot,
And
yeah, a lot of.
show that there's a concentration in that area, and that they've raised the prices and they've
That
forced
that
people
one
out.
individual investor did
It's
that.
almost, I think it would be very difficult to make that argument, that they were
Okay.
intentionally or that there was a disparate impact from individual investors.
Right, I mean, you could see where the city allowing that to occur, I mean, you might want to say.
Through their programs, through their
Right.
tax breaks, or through
Oh,
their
right,
CDG.
Right, but that's not the
Could be,
investor.
right, could be,
Okay.
that could be that's what you would go after.
Right,
Okay.
If you were
right.
making that lawsuit.
And so that's the
Right.
donation, like
Right.
the funding or tax break, that program is under scrutiny, not you, the investor for
Right,
taking
because
advantage of
I'm
it.
just,
Right.
exactly, I've gone into this area because it's an area I know I can sell my
Yeah,
product.
Yeah,
yeah, I
right.
mean, that's
Okay.
not a. thank you.
Okay,
What about like the condo conversions in Scottsdale and stuff like that, where they're taking the multi-housing and they're converting it to condominiums?
okay, the question is about the multi-housing conversion. You take something like an apartment building, and you convert it into condos.
Yeah, well, again, I think that is to the extent that there is anything that you can go after, that would be subject to that, to the disparate impact analysis, would be the city policies that promote, because the investors don't just go in there because it's, there are incentives for them to do certain things, right? And so those are the policies that are the disparate impact, that would have the disparate impact, and that's what would be challenged. Okay, and just so that usually the disparate impact cases are brought by the Department of Justice, and not to say that I'm not seeing this particular Department of Justice like jumping out all over these. So, perhaps, but
Okay.
Yeah, but again, it would be the policies of the city that promotes those. Yeah, a macro than a micro view. And so, for example, you're seeing this in lending in disparate impact cases. You are seeing that cities have now been deemed appropriate plaintiffs to go after, on the reverse side, to go
Right.
after lenders, right, for a lot of the foreclosures.
That was the Miami case.
Right.
Yeah.
So because there were so many, foreclosures, so that would be the flipping of the argument.
So, and if you don't know what she's referring to, the city of Miami just went through a court case in which they were, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was said, okay, the city can go after that lender for all of those REOs, and the impact, the financial impact it had on the city. We had a whole bunch of empty houses because you made loans that you shouldn't have made loans to people you shouldn't have made loans to. What that did in the decimation of our city was that we didn't have property taxes. That meant we couldn't provide services. And so in the court case, they just said, yes, Miami has standing to go after that. And that was why that was a really big deal, because previous to this, cities didn't think they had standing, and Miami went after it. So that case, by the way, is on wemargad.org if you want to read it and sort of look into it. It's on the website.
And it has those two parts, so it's standing and disparate impact, because
Go ahead.
if you think about it, there's the standing of the city, right?
Yes.
And then the disparate impact is, did the bank go out and individually say, we're gonna, we are intentionally discriminating when we are providing these subprime loans, right? You would have had to file every single one of those cases, right?
Yeah.
No. Instead, if they went after them on a disparate impact, by having a policy that perpetuated this kind of underwriting, no doc loans and subprime lending and the like, you allowed the decimation of these particular neighborhoods. That is a disparate impact type of case applied to an industry.
So that's huge. Think about the ramifications. As you start thinking about what we just went through the last 8 years, think about the ramifications going forward. So since you brought it up.
Since you brought it up. Since you opened your big mouth, what?
So when you start thinking about that, all of a sudden, because, well, let's just face it, and Florida was in the same boat as Arizona and some of those. I mean, everywhere we looked, everybody in their dog spot was getting hit by this. We walked into whole neighborhoods all over the place.
Yes.
So all of a sudden the disparate impact is what you didn't like Arizona, you didn't like Florida, because that, from our point of view at the ground, we're going, well, every house was in some neighborhoods I would go through, and it was a ghost town. There were no people for blocks in some of those neighborhoods. So how do you see that actually in real life panning out without it being, okay, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do these. We're going to limit the type of loans we do. And so to very, very, right, down payment, very restricted, except that that's already under disparate impact. Been a problem with the Luther Burbank case, where they were very conservative just as a manner of the way they ran their bank, requiring down payments, and they only did 30-year fixed, and they were very conservative, and they didn't have foreclosure. They already got smacked upside the head for that under disparate impact. So now you have a lender who was very liberal who's getting nailed, and a lender who's very conservative who got nailed under the exact same disparate impact issue. How do you think how do you see that going forward for our industry for lending? That's a huge, that's where the fear comes in, right? I see someone who's very liberal, I see someone who's very conservative, they got smacked upside the head from the same policy. What do I do? Where am I gonna go with this?
For lenders?
Yeah.
And for real estate agents, because it's a parallel type
Right.
thing, but let's start with the lenders because those are the cases we're talking about.
Right. So for, since we're talking about lenders, so for lenders, it's a question of having a diversity of products and having products that make, you hate to say this, but make underwriting sense.
Okay.
So part of what happened with the first, round of all the foreclosures was stuff that you could have seen coming, and I think every realtor could have seen it coming, miles away, where you had, and sometimes in the name of fair housing, pretending to give loans to people that were, where there was no justification for a loan, and which is not in anyone's best interest. So, and that's why that's predatory lending, because you are, and then on the other side, it was providing, loans for very qualified people at incredibly high interest rates. So, all of those were incredibly
Right.
negative. And then there are, and if you have only 30-year mortgages with, I wouldn't say that's as conservative. I would say that is probably exclusive in that it's not allowing for, it's not, your basic VA loans or other things like that aren't in their package then at all. So who is it that they're, lending to?
Yeah, and in this
Right.
case, it was a
So-
small private bank, so they're a portfolio lender. So what
Right.
they're worried about is,
I remember, yeah.
things go south and our bank goes under.
Right, right.
So, and I understand you're
Yeah.
saying, okay, you only have one flavor because so being too conservative is a problem.
Yeah, not having any diversity at all.
Right.
Yeah, so it's just having some, and they could have had a business justification for their basis if they were sufficiently small, and again, without, that's pretty fact specific.
Right, right.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so when our lenders are looking at this, then they're looking at sort of that we have more than just the very, very strict requirement. But we also have, if we go to the more liberal requirements, we have to be better at qualifying. So it comes to
That's it.
qualifying.
no requirements. That's really what that
Or
is.
no requirements,
Right.
right.
Liberal requirements are one thing, but none.
None,
Right.
yeah.
Right. No doc, no income, no.
Right.
Just come in and just say,
Right.
hi.
Well, I know, at one point it
right?
was, can you
I'm
find a
breathing,
mirror?
can I have a loan?
Right,
Sure.
right,
Exactly.
Yes.
Might have been a problem. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, no, yeah.
All right, so now translating that so everything we've talked about today, fair housing, ADA, the effects of disparate impact. Can you give us just a couple of tools or ideas that we just need to keep in our head on a regular basis that will help us get through this?
So I think the first thing that you want to do is you want to have that checklist. You
Okay.
want to have, when you're meeting with the client, your checklist of what you're doing, that you have those things. So it's just a visual reminder of things that you want to be aware of. And then you've gone through and you're thinking about, did I offer the variety of communities that meet these requirements that are not specifically in that area, and I've documented that. Did I, in terms of the person being qualified for this house, whatever the standards are,
Right.
Was it reasonable? It's really kind of an eye to that, right? In documenting for yourself what you've done, that you've done you followed that checklist of those three things that we discussed.
Yeah, no, I think.
And Bruna, is there anything?
No, I think that's exactly right. I think you just need to, whenever you're talking about any of these laws and applying them, you just need to think in terms of being inclusive, trying to be, fair, and not being fearful. It is, again, this is not a law none of these laws are intended to stop anyone from doing their jobs, and actually properly applied, they should be helpful to you and expand your client base. And when they're not doing that, I would urge you to step back and ask why not, and really question whether you're getting good information about what the law is, because a lot of times, and I've been doing this a long time, there is a lot of panic that gets out there and a lot of misinformation. It used to be, you can't sit down and, if you offer one person a cup of coffee and the other person another cup of coffee, you're going to get sued. Well, no, right? Everyone just breathe, right? That's not the case. You don't have to quit practicing any of that. Just, again, if the law doesn't make sense, take a step back, ask someone, and as long as you're trying to be inclusive, you more likely than not will be fine. Okay?
And I just want to mention, you've got a great resource with Liz
Yeah,
here. You
absolutely.
she's got a phenomenal
Okay,
website and
yes.
also
Thank you.
really
Absolutely,
grasp of
yes.
all these issues. I mean, she really can help you to sort through
Absolutely.
what you should and shouldn't be doing, and knows when she needs to ask somebody,
Yes.
an attorney. But really, your knowledge base is very,
It
very
is
strong.
very strong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very strong.
Been to a lot of associations, and this is a very good one. Yes,
Thank you.
you're very fortunate.
So I want to thank you all for coming today and taking your time to this. I know I learned a lot. I think you probably learned a lot as well. So know your resources, know who to talk to, find that person called an attorney. And I also want to thank Bruna and Alexis for giving us your time and all this knowledge and these tools. It has been wonderful, and we really appreciate this. Thank you.